so you're super bullish on Nvidia. Is there any major, Mag 7 or major tech incumbent or emerging incumbent that you're bearish on going forward?
Ooh, good question. It's so funny because like in pharma you have this dynamic as well where it's sort of very hard to sort of lose your long-term edge. You have to be because these businesses are so valuable that you know they have a hard time falling apart. I thought you were going to ask me the other question, which is a lot easier to answer.
Well, you can
But
answer that too.
yeah, I think Facebook's Meta's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
I'm just such a big fan of Zuck, and this amazing thing, this distribution he has. It almost doesn't matter if he makes his AI himself. Like all he has to do is like, he could just literally take an open source model, and it doesn't. The problem with I think, is that if you're OpenAI or Anthropic, pushing for more intelligence, like going from 150 IQ to 160 IQ, the kind of kids I went to high school with, it doesn't make them more interesting. You don't want to sit down with those kids at the at lunch for the lunchroom anyway. You know, you mostly Instagram users and Facebook users, most of their questions are sort of normalish stuff. Nobody's asking the Facebook AI prove the Riemann hypothesis. That's something that DeepMind and all these other guys want to do, but who actually needs that? I think that the average person doesn't need questions that complicated, and it'd be cool to see it happen. But for Zuck, I mean, he's got the distribution, and he's got the best product guys in the world. Hence the Snapchat battle that he sort of won and stole from. And I think that he's going to continue to do that and win. And I think he's going to get to $10 trillion sort of figure or something like that. So I don't know. I feel like it's so hard to like lose to the Mag 7. I do think we're going to get surprised. Like if you look at the history of capitalism and big stocks, you wouldn't recognize most of the Dow 30 from 100 years ago. United Cigar, there's some companies you've never heard of, and American Can, no joke, we laugh at that now, but like that's going to happen again. Some of these companies, maybe half these companies are going to disappear, and I certainly think Apple is like one of these things you raise your eyebrow at because but obviously it's hard to count them out. It's hard to bet against them. But Apple's one. If I had to pick one that I wouldn't like bet on, I wouldn't say I'm ready to bet against it. But Apple seems like it's now old hat, and there's nothing that special or charismatic about the company and their products. They used to be super cool and sleek and edgy. That design, like in fashion, you have to stay fresh. You have to stay pushing the envelope. You stay dangerous. And Apple was dangerous 20 years ago. It was new and nouveau. It's kind of whatever now. And I feel like that's a monopoly that can start to fracture a little bit depending on how other players play. Google is another one where it seems like no matter what they do with Gemini, it just kind of sucks and people don't want to use it. They have the distribution, but they don't have. They just sort of feel like a pocket protector. They feel like Yahoo in 2000. They feel like, yeah, it's not cool. It's not interesting. People want to do other things. So we'll have to see, if Google will fail or what will happen. Obviously, TPUs are an exciting business. Search is never going away in some ways, but it feels like there's some changing of the guard. And moments like this is when the Xeroxes become Xerox, and those types of things, those transitions start to happen before your eyes, and you don't necessarily feel it or notice it right away, but they do happen. And I don't know what Mag 7 is going to become a Lag 7, but eventually you're going to get the Lag 7.
Yeah. You could, to your point on Meta, I mean, you could tell they're a live player by them, in the arena, paying billions of dollars for Alexander Wang, for Daniel Gross, for Nat Friedman. Like Apple's not doing that. They
Exactly.
could attract it. They have the money to. They're almost sitting on a resource curse of the iPhone, but not willing to
Yeah, doing
make them.
buybacks.
Yeah,
I mean, why do
exactly.
buybacks? Like, if you can't pick the winner, and again, this may sound strange or stupid, but like if it were me, I can't pick the winner. I don't know what company to buy. You can buy 5 or 10% of each of these. You could give, Sequoia or A16Z. Here's $100 billion. Go invest it for us. But doing buybacks is like historically it's the worst thing you could do. I mean, it really is kind of this admission that you don't know what you kind of don't know what to do with the capital. You don't know where the future's heading. It's a financial engineering. It's kind of stuff I do. Like it's a very financial engineering kind of nerdy, not that innovative thing, and it kind of like it's indicative of their business, I think, being sort of like they haven't released new products. They're just refreshes the same old products. All the new stuff they did has sort of been bad other than AirPods. So I feel like, it's also going to be other companies. Microsoft's sort of also sitting on a perch that's not great. I mean, you know, they make OS software. Don't need OS software anymore. You make Office tools. You can vibe code those. Et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like, that's sort of a dangerous perch. I don't think anything's going to happen in Excel, but I feel like, there is a fear that all of Mag 7 could be in trouble, and that, maybe it is hardware that rules the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, we see, Anthropic, OpenAI, threatening startups or even very big companies on a seemingly weekly basis. And Elad Gil, the legendary investor, tweeted out the other day something like, if you're a company in AI, if you're an AI company, consider getting sold in the next 18 months. You're just speaking to the power that these big companies have, and I think there's also just a broader question as to whether the AI sort of platform shift will look like the internet, in that the, application companies will accrue a lot of the value, or if it'll look more of like the cloud, in the sense that maybe the hardware layer has the better margins, and like we're seeing with Nvidia right now.
Yeah, nobody knows, but one thing I think is that software's not dead yet,
Yeah.
and I think that we're making this financial software. We've been working at it 2 years. We're sort of still in beta. We have some nice revenue. We're almost profitable. We haven't launched it yet, and it's this sort of many people try to make this thing. It's sort of a Bloomberg killer. Killer is a strong word. Bloomberg's been this like software monopoly for 40 years. And the reason it works is because it's actually very hard software to make, and your customer expects. I was just sitting down with a customer. Uh, he expects the bond prices when he looks up a bond to be right. And bonds are something that like 90% of these apps, like Perplexity Finance, for example, doesn't have bonds. Um, half of Wall Street, or even 60 or 70% of Wall Street's related to bonds. And if you don't have your bond prices in there and you vibe coded it, well, a bond API player takes 6 months to do a contract. Like these guys are so sleepy. They don't want to talk to you. They almost don't want a new customer. And if you want bond prices and you have to like make sure, oh, when you look up this French bond, it's correct. Like that's something that like that kind of taste and that kind of like attention to detail is just not something you can vibe code. And it's so hard to get right. Customers a customer at Citadel, he's not vibe coding something. He wants to buy something. And he wants to buy something that works all the time. And if it breaks, he wants to yell at somebody and take his business somewhere else. That's the kind of thing you get out of software. And the relationships matter. Sal, my wonderful Bloomberg rep or whatever it is, those kinds of things sell software. So I sort of think the panic is most panics aren't, really what you expect. Something's going to change, but I think some of this panic is unrealistic. And then, it again, going back to like, the Bloomberg example, we have like 1,800 news relationships with news companies. And, if you vibe coded it yourself, I've seen people do this, they get five. And it's like, well, the trader cares about the 1,713th news source that's going to screw up his portfolio. He doesn't care about, the five that everyone know about. So I feel like, vibe coding is kind of, it's a fantastic thing, where you can cut your software costs a little bit or just raise the ability of your software, but it doesn't replace marketing and sales. It doesn't replace product and taste. It doesn't replace, personal relationships, and it doesn't replace the customer who wants to have really well made software. It may increase your ability to compete, but it's I feel like the changes that where like software stocks have dropped like a rock, those are probably opportunities to buy, and I feel like depending on the stock, you can get some bargains out there.